For most of Rome's history, the city needed grain to arrive steadily to feed its millions. But this stream could falter. A poor harvest somewhere far away meant less grain sent down the river. Ships stopped by storms or blockades meant empty stalls in the capital. Plagues kept farmers from their fields, leaving crops to spoil before they could be cut. You saw these forces not from afar, but in the shape of thinner loaves in your hands, and in the length of time you had to wait as you stood in line before the bakers. The meals were simple even when supply held strong. Bread was the center of almost every plate, broken and eaten with olives, sometimes figs when the season allowed. If you had more luck, you might stretch the bread with a dollop of soft cheese. But when shortages came, the ritual of these meals turned into frustration. Olives were too sharp or too few. Figs were missing entirely. Bread alone could be stale, hard, crumbly enough to scrape the roof of your mouth. Repetition of bare sustenance reminded you not of empire but of survival. Picture the market swelling with people jostling forward, every hand reaching for the same small goods. Merchants shouted their prices, voices sharp over the din, while those waiting groaned and argued. You could feel impatience pressing around you just as surely as the heat. A stall of olives ran out before you reached the front. You stared at the empty baskets, only pits left behind. The sound of coins clinking nearby made you wonder if yours would be enough when it was your turn. Prices could soar without warning. A basket of figs one week seemed fair, the next week it felt cruel. You watched loaves shrink while the cost swelled. Some stretched their wine, pouring water into it so the volume doubled though the taste soured. Meat, once bought in celebration, became the mark of the wealthy, a scent that passed by your nose but rarely landed on your tongue. To carry coins into the marketplace gave no promise you would leave with what you needed. Inflation added its own quiet pressure. Coins in your hand carried less than they once did. They were the same in size and shape, but lighter, filled with cheap metal instead of the silver that once gave them weight. You sensed their weakness when merchants frowned, testing them, demanding more pieces for less food. In this way, each purse stretched thinner, and the effort to feed a family grew heavier. Think of this system like a clay pot cracked at the base. Nudge it once with a small shock, and maybe the water still holds. But press again, or let weight build too high, and soon it leaks from every seam. Rome's food system was that pot. The cracks could come from disease, war, or weather. Each blow worsened the break. Each family felt the spill. Hunger was not an accident or a mistake. It was a daily gamble played by millions, and the dice were rolled far from their hands. Some days the table teased abundance, and a loaf was warm, thick, filling, paired with olives that actually satisfied. Other days the table delivered little more than sawdust bread and sour wine, thin comfort against a long shift of labor. And so you lived with the uncertainty, carried home whatever handful you could manage, and prepared to share it carefully across the household. Where once Rome's wealth had seemed endless, food itself revealed how fragile that wealth truly was. A grand empire looked no stronger than its empty baskets and shrinking loaves. You nibble the bread, sip the wine, chew an olive's thin meat, and though you eat, you do not feel full. Yet this meal must carry you through. The day continues and the body does not wait. And still, after swallowing this portion and quieting your hunger for the moment, another challenge waits in the corner of living. eating was not the end of hardship. Even the most private act, answering nature itself, carried its own trial in the world of Rome. What if privacy, the kind you take for granted today, was replaced by a crowded stone room where every seat pressed close beside another? Imagine stepping into such a place, not with doors, not with quiet, but with rows of heavy benches carved with holes, each one close enough that your arm nearly brushed the person beside you. That was the Roman latrine, a communal solution to a problem every human shares, yet handled in a way that feels strangely exposed. Instead of retreating into a private corner, you walked across a wide floor where stone benches stretched in long lines. Some were curved, some straight, but the idea stayed the same. You sat shoulder to shoulder with strangers, each facing forward, each keeping their posture with a mix of awkward courage and acceptance. Conversation flowed here as easily as in the marketplace outside, voices echoing off the stone walls, bouncing above the trickle and splash of water below the benches. Laughter, small talk, gossip. It all carried through the space as if you were gathered at a tavern rather than a toilet. Beneath those benches ran shallow streams of water. These channels carried away the waste as best they could, though the air told you that not all left as swiftly as planned. Above the benches, buckets and troughs held water for a tool that feels stranger still to imagine: the sponge on a stick. One was not enough for each person. Instead, these sponges were shared, dipped into flowing water, and then reused by the next who came. It was practical by Roman standards, but to modern eyes it feels like an invitation for illness. Think of the unease here. You shifted on smooth, cold stone, hearing the scrape of sandals as someone settled beside you. You reached for the sponge, knowing it carried traces of others already. Each movement reminded you that sanitation was not measured by protection, but by how quickly water could wash away what was left behind. The trough trickled, the sponge dipped, passed, replaced again. A rhythm of necessity, but one heavy with risk. The hazards were not hidden. Shared tools like this spread illness quickly. Air inside these rooms was damp and sometimes sour, a mix of standing odors, stagnant water, and bodies gathered too close. In the warmth of summer, the smell hung heavier, clinging to cloth and skin even after you left. During colder days, the dampness stiffened the air, but the closeness remained, breath meeting breath under vaulted ceilings. This was a necessary place, but it was not a place of comfort. And yet, by the standards of their neighbors across the known world, Rome's latrines stood as an achievement. Many regions had little more than open pits or fields, while here water flowed, stone benches stood firm, and entire blocks shared one large facility rather than crowding their alleys. It was impressive for its order and engineering, even as it carried undeniable danger. Like much of Roman life, it revealed ambition. They built for the many on a scale rarely seen before, sacrificing privacy for efficiency. Still, efficiency came with a cost. Imagine the simple act of relieving yourself becoming a reminder of fragility. You could not enter such spaces without brushing against the risks of poor hygiene and the chance of infection spreading from one body to another. Each visit pressed you into the same chain of exposure as hundreds of others. Nature's call never felt private. It was a duty carried out together, each person adding to the chorus of chatter, the splash of water, the uneasy laughter masking discomfort. The sensory details deepened that unease. Your sandals skidded softly on damp stone, and each step left a faint print that glistened until another boot filled the same space. Droplets formed in shadowed corners, dripping at intervals that matched your heartbeat. The water streamed beneath, not fast but steady, carrying waste away toward larger channels hidden below the streets. The bench was cool and unwelcome at first touch, making you shift until you accepted its reality. And all the while other voices filled the space. Chuckles from young men pretending at ease, murmurs from women sharing quiet words, groans from elders weary of the climb to enter. If you pause for a moment inside that soundscape, you can sense the contrast. Roman ingenuity on display, yet tangled with risk. It is like a grand hall lit softly, but one where each lamp flickers, never steady, always hinting at darkness. The comfort of advanced design shimmered against the edge of fear. They had built something far ahead of simpler traditions, yet each visit carried with it the chance of disease lingering unseen on sponge, stone, and air. Even here, in one of the most ordinary routines of life, survival was uncertain. A simple act carried both the promise of shared structure and the hazard of shared sickness. The Roman dream of order pressed onto these benches of stone revealed that even at its height, progress was threaded with danger. And as these cramped communal spaces collected the habits of thousands, they did more than unsettle the body. They prepared the ground for greater horrors yet to come, when sickness grew stronger than the city itself. Imagine a city where every street hides the sound of coughing, and each morning you notice fewer neighbors stepping into the light. Rome, so full of noise and motion, slowly changed into something quieter, unsettled, heavy with fear. At first you thought it was only sickness passing through here for a season, as other fevers had come before. But the days stretched and the sound of wheezing and cries grew louder. When the 3rd century plague struck, it did not rise and fall quickly. It lingered year after year, hanging thick over houses and temples until even the strongest doubted they would live to see its end. You felt it not only in the air but in the absences. Days that once began with a crowd bustling to the fountains now felt thin. Voices you had grown used to hearing in the morning no longer came down from their rooms. Windows stayed shuttered, heavy cloth nailed across frames to keep out what could not be seen. The disease did not announce itself grandly. It crept through close breaths, through crowded spaces, through the very habits that held the city together. Entire families vanished, their insular rooms left open or silent. Farming villages outside the city lay abandoned when those who tilled the land fell too ill to continue their work. Crops shriveled in the fields, not because of drought, but because no hand remained to cut them. Granaries emptied while the soil still held grain, and the roads that once carried wheat and barley into Rome echoed with far lighter traffic. Empty markets spoke of those missing long before you saw the gaps in the fields. The sense of departure was everywhere. Streets that once carried a constant flow of carts now echoed strangely, wheel rims clinking against stone with no rhythm of crowds to muffle them. Bakers opened their stalls to shorter lines, but the few who came brought fear in their eyes, unwilling to linger in air they thought might already be poisoned. The strain reached the army as well. Soldiers fell not to an enemy's blade, but to a breath shared too close on campaign. Ranks thinned, and the very edge Rome had once held over its neighbors dulled without a single battle taking place. It was not an isolated bruise against the capital either. In Alexandria, another jewel city of the empire, the same sickness carved away thousands. Reports spoke of streets that lay as hushed as graveyards, temples where priests stood before empty halls, and houses with doors swinging open onto bare silence. When half a city is gone, you feel the weight not only in numbers but in mood. Life itself seemed to have slipped sideways into a shadowed version of itself. Walking through Rome during this time meant carrying both the smell of sickness and the sight of absence. You could pass by whole blocks where shutters rattled gently in the wind, though no hand inside would ever open them again. Even the public latrines, once crowded and noisy, stood half deserted. Few wanted to risk close air, though the habit of gathering was so ingrained that some continued until their voices too fell silent. Think of the hush after a festival ends when the fireworks are gone and only dusk remains. The plague spread that hush not for a night but for long, draining years. It wore down spirit as much as bodies. Hunger rose again, for there were not enough hands to feed the city even when food could be found. Coins felt emptier now, traded between those too weak to use them. Poverty deepened, and even the wealthy counted their luck not by gold, but by whether their households remained unbroken. Stone walls, arches, aqueducts. Rome's structures stood as they had for generations, but within them fragility reigned. This was the first time many began to understand fully that monuments do not keep death away. A vaulted ceiling did not bar the path of breath. Marble floors cracked just as straw floors did when sickness pulled a house apart. The illusion of safety within stone collapsed, leaving raw truth. Survival was not promised. Imagine stepping out early in the morning when shadows still stretch across the stones and realizing that no one walks behind you. You turn a corner to see a fountain dripping unattended, amphorae left leaning like relics. You know what those sights mean. Yesterday another family stood here, today they do not. In such absence, the weight of the plague pressed most sharply, reminding you that the cores of Roman life, its streets, its markets, its armies, were bound together in weakness once enough people were gone. The plague pulled the mask away and left a city that could not pretend its strength was endless. What seemed unshakable thinned to silence, and Rome's people felt fear as thick as any chain. Illness cut without sword or spear, yet the wound it left across the empire was plain. And if disease could spread without warning, what hope remained when anger and betrayal stirred in the highest places of power? What happens when even emperors cannot escape the chaos of their world? Imagine sitting high above armies and treasuries with the authority of Rome in your hand, and yet still finding yourself cornered, fragile, and unsure where to turn. The story of Emperor Severus Alexander is just that, a moment when the power of a crown offered little protection. His choice would not only end his reign, but also reveal how thin the veil of security had grown across the empire. The pressure he faced was enormous. Outside the empire's frontiers, invaders pressed hard at the borders, and they did not move with hesitation. Cities lay open, trade routes bent, and fear spread both among soldiers and in the markets back home. Inside the capital, people already felt the strain of shortage and disease. He was emperor, yet every path before him looked costly. To march against enemies promised battles with uncertain victories. To avoid bloodshed meant finding another way. His answer was silver, Instead of sending men to fill fields with bodies, Severus Alexander sent money. He believed that bribery could soothe where swords would only cut deeper. In his eyes, paying off those who threatened Rome seemed practical. A pile of coins handed to invading groups might keep them at bay without grief spilling into river valleys. Perhaps it would buy time, allowing Rome to breathe. For him, bribery was less weakness than strategy, an easier wound to bear. But generals saw something different. Standing in ranks of armor, hardened by campaigns, they believed strength was the only coin Rome could spend safely. To them, gold meant nothing compared to the respect won on battlefields. They saw their emperor's choice as hollow. Money handed to strangers felt like waste when their own soldiers went hungry. Every purse that soothed outsiders seemed to rob those who had pledged loyalty within. Imagine the sting of that. You wear armor, march in heat, hold a sword steady, and then watch your emperor fill the hands of your foes with treasure that might have provisioned you instead. The bitterness grew heavy. It bred not only doubt but anger. Anger whispered from one general to another, each voice carrying the same thought. This emperor had chosen outsiders over his own men. Rome's spirit, they believed, had cracked. Betrayal ripened in silence. An army is bound by loyalty, yet loyalty frays fast when leaders appear weak. Rumors spread through the camps, murmurs that wealth was draining away for nothing. Soldiers who had endured years of strain now chafed at watching their efforts denied recognition. The emperor seemed to trust not their discipline or strength, but only the purse he could offer. While he believed he was buying peace, he was instead purchasing resentment. It was among his own protectors that the breaking point came. The generals, men who had once sworn to uphold him, turned their eyes inward. Their decision was hard only in theory. Once whispered, it found agreement quickly. To them, removing weakness seemed like duty. Bribery had bent Rome at its knees, and only a sharp cut could straighten its spine again. So the whispers hardened into resolve, and resolve turned into fatal action. The assassination was swift. A knife pressed against him, not from an enemy across the frontier, but from those who had guarded his side the closest. Soldiers surrounded, generals led the strike, and the emperor's body fell. A crown could not stop a blade born from anger. Bribery had cost not only silver but trust, and when trust died, the man who commanded the legions did too. Think of the echo this carried back to Rome. If an emperor could fall to betrayal within his own camp, what security could any citizen believe they held in their daily lives? The empire's figurehead bleeding at the hands of his protectors was like a mirror held up to the city itself. If the heart at the top cracked so easily, how safe were those trapped in insula, waiting in markets or walking through dangerous streets? The answer came as silence, fear, and resignation. Like the empty Colosseum rimmed with weeds, like the markets where bread vanished from baskets, the murder of a ruler revealed how deep the fractures ran. Rome weakened not only in its borders, but in its very center. An emperor's death by knife was one more sign that order no longer held steady. So the chain grew clear. Rulers fell, sickness raged, coins lost weight, and survival slipped further from reach. For the ordinary Roman, lasting even a single day demanded not luxury or pride, but endless endurance against strain on every side. Tonight, imagine the weight of daily life in Rome, hunger pressing at your stomach, smoke clinging to your lungs, and the shadow of betrayal high above. Survival was never a promise. Scarcity, disease, and shifting loyalties shape the rhythm of each day far more than marble arches or grand arenas. Grandeur fades quickly when the simplest needs are denied. A city can shine with temples, but if bread is scarce and safety uncertain, greatness dissolves into struggle. Rome, for all its strength, revealed this truth. If this helped you relax, consider returning for another tale of ancient worlds.